Back when I was a stupid kid without the exquisitely refined standards of quality and game design I have now, I loved Sonic Adventure 2. But playing it today just leaves me with a sour taste in my mouth. Sonic is the only good part of the game. The Knuckles and Robot stages are unplayable! I mean, look at that! That's unavoidable! Totally unacceptable with today's standards of game design. Not to mention, the story is DeviantArt inflation levels of cringe that tries way too hard to be dark and edgy. I mean, come on. This is a cartoon blue hedgehog we're talking about. Sonic should just shut up, run fast, and destroy robots. We all know the only good part of this game is the Chao. Sonic 06, am I right? Heyo guys, Ruby of Blue here, and this is why I think Sonic Adventure 2 is amazing. Sadly though, just like SA1, the game has received a brutal lashing in recent years. An undeserved one at that. So that's why I'm here to explain to you in detail why I think this game is not only amazing, but my favorite 3D Sonic game.
In 4 hours? Jesus Christ.
I believe this game to be great in just about every area, even more so than SA1, thanks to the competency which the fast-paced, action-oriented, replayable gameplay, huge amounts of extra content, amazing and diverse soundtrack, and ambitious, intricate storyline were made. A lot of the basics from SA1 that also apply to SA2 I've already covered in my Sonic Adventure 1 analysis, so if you haven't already, be sure to watch that video first. Before we get into the analysis proper, let me recommend 2 mods. The Sonic Adventure 2 Retranslated mod, and a mod that fixes the volume for the sound effects. For those who use Japanese voices, this mod alters the subtitles to be accurate translations of the Japanese dialogue. Because even with the Japanese voices selected, the game still shows subtitles for the English dialogue. A lot of character moments and story points can only be properly conveyed through the Japanese dialogue, so this is a vital mod if you want the full experience. I highly recommend switching to the original voices if you want to get the most out of the story of this game, because not only can the English acting and direction fall short,
I don't think so.
Shadow.
So that was your plan from the very beginning. Or was it a direct order from the president? Now I know who you are. You're that government spy, Rouge the Bat, aren't you?
the localization really doesn't do the game's characters and story justice.
Is that what Chaos Control is?
The other mod lowers the sound effects of the game, which were ear-grittingly loud. This was a result of the extremely shitty porting jobs that not just SA2 has undergone, but SA1 as well. Both of the games have been very poorly ported from Dreamcast to GameCube, and have had ports of ports made of them that bring them to modern platforms. Screwed up in these ports, or even flat out missing, are textures, lighting, effects, shading, sound mixing, and even glitches have been introduced. If you want a rundown on just how badly SA1 and 2 have been maimed by these port jobs, there are links in the description of analyses going into detail with the changes and breaks. Unfortunately, the GameCube versions, which were ported onto modern platforms later, are the versions that most people, namely YouTube critics, have played. And that's a shame, because when the ports screw up the presentation in such a lousy way, it can really sour someone's overall perspective on the game. Unlike with Sonic Adventure 1, there is not yet a Dreamcast conversion mod available for SA2, and that hurts. If you watch the SA2 version comparison video I linked in the description, you'll see many visual elements are flat out missing or broken in every version since the GameCube. So please, any modders out there, we're all begging you, please do Sega's job for them and let us all see this game the way it was intended. Now that that's out of the way, part 1 of this analysis will focus on everything from the gameplay to the extra modes, like the Chao Garden, even to the art and character designs and the soundtrack. In part 2, we'll laser focus on the story and go into each individual level as well. Now then, let's get to the meat. The way I like to put it is that Sonic Adventure 2 is a streamlined and refined Sonic Adventure 1. It cuts the fat, is more polished, and expands and improves on the prior game's ideas while adding some of its own, like a good sequel does. The biggest difference in structure between SA1 and 2 is that 2 lacks any adventure fields. Depending on who you ask, this is a good or bad thing. but I really think there's merit to both approaches. Because of the lack of adventure fields, this allows SA2's story and adventure to span a significantly larger amount of land, and show us more of the Sonic world, but it also allows each character to have their own level specifically designed to play to their own strengths, since they don't have to worry about having entrances to every level in adventure fields. Though, side note, sadly with this approach we don't get to have Sonic go through areas designed for Knuckles, which I think made for the best parts of his levels in SA1. This approach also lends itself to having more consistent and smoother story momentum and pacing. SA1's adventure fields serve their purpose well as spaces to flesh out the world of Sonic and cool down from the story, and I think it earned Adventure 2 the right to streamline things for the sake of both telling its narrative in the best way possible, but fleshing out each style even further. Speaking of styles and streamlining, another big element is that we've gone from SA1's 6 gameplay styles with 6 stories to 3 gameplay styles and 2 stories, not counting the shorter last episode. SA2 cuts Tails' flight-based gameplay, Amy's slower platforming, and Big's fishing in favor of keeping Sonic's speed platforming, Knuckles' hunting, and Gamma's mech shooting, while expanding and improving on them in some way. One general improvement that impacts all styles greatly is the change from 30 FPS to 60 FPS. Honestly, all Sonic games really need to be 60 FPS or above, because Sonic games are exactly the kind of games that benefit more from the fluidity and reaction time that 60 FPS gives you. SA2 now only features 2 stories, Hero and Dark, with all 3 styles in both, which means you'll be switching gameplay styles between levels, though the switching between styles will never be a consistent pattern such that there can be 2 stages of one style back to back. This story structure has some benefits over SA1's character roulette, the biggest being the amount of repetition is cut down significantly. Where before you would see a cutscene 3, maybe even 4 separate times with minor differences, here it's at most 2. And again, it lends itself to a smooth and consistent flow of the narrative, and at that, one where we get to see multiple characters' perspectives back to back. But this structure, I suspect, is a giant factor in why some people complain about the hunting and shooting stages. Do you ever find it strange that you barely see anyone making a big deal out of the non-Sonic gameplay styles in SA1? Other than the fishing, because memes. But in SA2, even though they make some improvements, those stages are touted as some egregious examples of bad game design. I think that's mainly because in SA1, if you wanted to play as Sonic only, you could. And with the exception of SA1's minigames, you'd never be forced to play another style. However, with SA2, you switch styles on a level-by-level basis. For some people, namely people who subscribe to the Sonic Stupid Friends line of thinking, this method of structuring the game can be a negative. I mean, for me, this actually works as a positive. The switching of styles allows the game to stay fresh since the different style is always right around the corner. This, along with the lack of adventure fields, makes SA2's story mode easier to just casually binge on than SA1 for me. None of this is to say the hunting and shooting stages are fundamentally different from the speed stages though. SA2 does well to maintain a consistent philosophy of facilitating a player's flow of movement or action with a high skill ceiling. No matter which style, the character moves very quickly and the levels are built to accommodate skillful build-up and preservation of momentum with minimal downtime for the most part. But for any future games that follow SA2's structure, this problem can be easily avoided. If you're going to have style switching between levels, then you should ideally have each style play more similarly to each other, with minor alterations, similar objectives, and similar level design. For example, how the 2D games handle other characters. They all have the same or similar base controls and movements, but with their own abilities to play around with the goal of reaching the end of the stage, and a consistent level design philosophy. However, I am a bit hesitant to propose that as a solution, because if that model were followed with SA2, it wouldn't exist in its current form, and I love SA2 as it is. That solution would change the game such that we wouldn't get to see Tails flesh out his intelligence and character arc by using a Cyclone, and we wouldn't have gotten to play as Eggman for the first time, which also allowed us to get to know him more personally and cement him as more than just a comical villain. I know this structure can turn some people off, but speaking for myself, I wouldn't want to change SA2's structure or gameplay in any drastic way. Before we go into the styles in detail, I want to expand on the point of the precise turning I mentioned in my SA1 review. I've heard people complain that the sensitivity of the turning makes it too hard to control at higher speeds, and is a flaw. I disagree. This is the best part about the basic movement, because it creates a high skill ceiling with albeit a higher skill floor when going fast. In every Sonic game up to now, except Sonic 1, it was always easy to gain incredible amounts of speed. What was difficult, however, was maintaining that speed. The adventure games are no different in that regard, but where the 2D games required quick reflexes and memorization to maintain speed in the open areas, The adventure games require mastering the precise and sensitive controls which, yes, are perfectly capable of being mastered. And that precision being maintained at high speeds allows for so much freedom and platforming potential, even if it requires more skill to maintain that speed and puts you at bigger risk of running into a hazard. If we were to say reduce the rate at which Sonic turns the higher his speed is, or have him turn like in the boost games, that would severely limit not just the player's options, but would actively discourage from trying to go fast in the more non-linear open areas. This would not be possible were the movement controls to lose their precision upon reaching higher speeds. But anyway, like I said, SA2 chose to keep the speed platforming, hunting, and shooting, and expand and improve on them. And I'd say it did that quite well, but it did also make changes to each style that makes them unique from their SA1 counterparts in some way. Some for better, some for worse. Sonic proudly reprises his SA1 gameplay with newcomer Shadow the Hedgehog using the same style, featuring the same basic movement controls, smooth buildup of momentum, momentum physics, and homing attack. A neat little detail added with the homing attack is the characters will now make different poses as they fly from enemy to enemy. Cheeky bastards. And the characters will now visibly spin out of a homing attack when not targeting an enemy, rather than just falling out of it. Another small detail is that this time, when doing the basic jump, we physically see them spin in the air, rather than being represented by an abstract ball. To be honest, I prefer the ball animation. It's still used in other areas, just not for the basic jump. Something I neglected to mention in my SA1 analysis, and this applies to SA2 as well, is that oftentimes enemies will be lined up over a gap where you must chain the homing attack to get across. It's a pretty simple challenge, but you can't just mash the jump button to clear it. You must make sure you're actually aiming at the enemy with the control stick, and you have to wait a fraction of a second before hitting another enemy to get more air, since you can't homing attack enemies above you. SA2 expands on these homing attack chains by having alternate paths of enemies leading to more points, timing homing attack chains between enemies activating force fields, having to kill an enemy over a pit, where you must homing attack back to the starting platform, and so on. But for a lot of these chains, it's possible to make use of the returning and refined lightspeed attack to clear the gap in a flash, which can actually break through an enemy's electric force field. And lastly, if you don't care about the extra points from enemy kills and instead prefer faster but riskier strats, oftentimes you can take advantage of the spin dash to cross those large gaps with ease. And speaking of which, the biggest change SA2 makes to the base abilities is the spin dash, which now requires holding down the action button for a second before it actually begins charging. This now means spamming it like in SA1 isn't possible. If you watched my SA1 video, you'd know the spin dash was actually my favorite part of the gameplay, because it allowed me to go as fast as I wanted while still retaining full array of movement, as long as I had the skill to not run into everything and die. And a faster activation also meant less downtime when taking advantage of the game's physics to get creative. While I definitely prefer the spin dash in SA1, the way it functions in SA2 certainly doesn't ruin it for me. You can still use it to maintain a high speed, activate it at any time while running without coming to a complete stop, turn freely while charging up, and use it to take advantage of the game's physics to get creative. But something I do find questionable is the somersault, which you activate by tapping the action button. It's used to pass under tight spaces, destroy boxes, and attack enemies' legs. The amount of times you tap the button will be the number of rolls performed, up to 3. And you can even cancel out of a roll if you press the jump button immediately after starting it. If you jump out of it after the first roll, Sonic will have a special jump animation. You can already really see that SA2 takes great care with polish over SA1 with all these little details. While I appreciate the care put into the move, I find this new addition really redundant. There's no reason the spin dash shouldn't be able to do everything that the somersault does. And the move has a set low speed too, which can really break your flow if you accidentally activate it. I don't hate the somersault by any means, but there you go. Just giving its functionality to the spin dash would have been better, and that way, without having to share a button, the spin dash could work like it did in SA1 while we're at it. Another new move is the bounce attack, which you get from the power-up the bounce bracelet, and I love this one. You use it primarily to reach higher platforms, but the best part about it is that you can use it to immediately gain a huge amount of downward momentum, allowing you to reach the ground much faster when in the air. Even better is when you chain a homing attack out of the move, and immediately gain forward momentum on the ground. I love this technique for maintaining a nice flow through a level, and I find myself doing it all the time. Now, this totally isn't an intended feature of the bounce attack, but damn is it fun to use. If you spin dash towards a wall and bounce at the last second before hitting the wall, while still moving towards it, your forward momentum will be transferred into vertical momentum, allowing you to bounce crazy high. This can be used to traverse areas faster, but also specifically in the Egg Golem boss fight, to get quick access to the weak point on his head. It's just a shame that without the SA2 mod manager, Shadow can't use this ability. Something interesting of note is how the elemental shields from Sonic 3 and K, which were a great part of that game, have been effectively implemented into Sonic's moveset. The Fire Shield's dash ability has been turned into the homing attack, the Bubble Shield has been turned into the bounce attack, the only one that's still a shield is the Electric Shield. It can still attract rings, but its double jump has been removed from SA1 and 2. The Lightspeed dash returns from SA1, but vastly improved. Instead of charging it up with a spin dash, all you have to do is approach any trail of rings, and you're immediately whisked along in an instant. It's something that's just satisfying to do, and this time around there are many more optional ring trails to take advantage of. The best thing about this is, where before the Lightspeed dash would break your flow, now it enhances it. You can use it on any trail of rings to speed forward extremely quickly, and oftentimes the move is used to quickly attach to a rail to grind on. And speaking of which, grinding is the biggest addition to the gameplay. The mechanic itself is pretty basic, just land on a rail and balance left and right using the stick, while holding down the action button to accelerate. The speed you're going when you hit the rail will be transferred into your grind, so you can gain a huge amount of speed if you homing attack or bounce attack the rail at the right angle. But since you can't home in on rails, it does require some skill to do effectively. Grinding itself isn't the great thing on its own. What's great is how it's used. Aside from the spectacle aspect, grinding is best used as either a reward of quick traversal for your skillful platforming and momentum preservation, or used to build anticipation for an upcoming challenge and to test your timing and mastery of the controls. In essence, what makes grinding great in SA2 isn't the grinding itself, but how it's used to enhance the momentum-based platforming gameplay. The only bad thing about the grinding mechanic is the rail switching mechanic can be pretty unreliable. If you hold the stick in the direction of a parallel rail, you can quickly hop over to it while preserving your momentum. Unfortunately, it flat out doesn't work if you're going too fast or making a turn. You either go flying off the rail or don't jump properly, often resulting in death. But you rarely need to switch rails anyway, and anytime you do, you're never going fast enough to mess up your jump. Another minor annoyance that crops up is that SA2 doesn't seem to properly take advantage of the multiple buttons on the controller. With the exception of jump and the homing attack, every single move is mapped to the action button. In some ways, this works nicely to minimize the amount of button management your fingers need to do and keeps things simple, but sometimes it can result in undesired effects. For example, if you're in the air and you want to use the Lightspeed dash on a trail of rings, you may accidentally activate the bounce attack instead, which will send you plummeting down, often to your death. And when trying to interact with objects, you can accidentally activate the somersault instead. Simply put, there's no reason Lightspeed dash and object interaction couldn't be mapped to either the Y or B button on the Dreamcast controller. Just like SA1, SA2 features short, automated transitional segments. However, this time around, they do a much better job with the spectacle. In SA1, loops would often have the camera zoom out while Sonic ran through them. In SA2, though, the camera is much more involved in the action. I talked about how these segments served as transitions, and give you an overview of the next big area at the end of them. But upon replaying these games, I've come to realize they serve another purpose, as breathers. Both SA1 and 2 are very high-octane action platformers, where my hands and mind are working overtime to manage the speedy gameplay. And as such, the automated sections have always served as short breathers for me without even realizing it until now, and they gave me time to prepare for the next section. But the great thing is, they still keep the action and movement of the level flowing. These automated sections are often lauded as cheap thrills, but as someone who replays SA1 and 2 constantly, I've come to realize these short sections may play a small but important role in why these stages are so much fun to replay over and over, in that they prevent player burnout with short breathers without stopping the action. Now, the biggest change to the overall gameplay, and a big factor in why a lot of people prefer SA1's Sonic gameplay, is the level design. Where a lot of SA1's levels tended to be more spacious and intricate, SA2's levels, continuing with the theme of streamlining, featured linear but not straight paths that are generally smaller. The level design specifically facilitates a preservation of your momentum or flow, but it also means the exploration value is cut down significantly. There are still hidden items and alternate paths depending on the level, just to a lesser degree than SA1. You'd think that with this giant change in the level design, SA2 would have much less depth than SA1, right? Well, SA2 has other ideas. To make up for the loss in exploration and level size, SA2 adds a slew of new features that work alongside the more linear design, increase the primal satisfaction, and enhance the replay value by raising the skill ceiling. We've already gone over the grinding, but another giant new factor that synergizes with the linear design is the trick system. This was something in SA1 to a limited degree, however it's been massively fleshed out here. The speed stages aren't only about skillfully preserving your momentum anymore, but doing it in the coolest, most stylish way possible. Performing tricks off of ramps and rails, chaining together enemy kills, jumping through hoops, reaching more challenging areas, and grinding on hard-to-reach rails all earn you points that increase your total score. And oftentimes, performing these tricks directly speed up your flow of momentum, making it synergize perfectly with the base gameplay and enhance it. And since these aren't all easy to perform, it facilitates the replay value to learn and improve your gameplay and feels so damn good when you perfect your flow through a stage. The boost games were also designed in a similar way. However, what SA2 has over the boost gameplay is that it doesn't sacrifice the fluidity and freedom of the controls, and is much more kind to first-time players of that stage, so you don't have to already have memorized the stage to do well in it.
Also, it's not 3/5 2D.
Another factor is that SA1's level design shook itself up more often, having more varied level layouts and challenges with minigames interspersed here and there. SA2 is much more homogeneous in focus, which makes sense since the levels can now be built for the speed characters exclusively. And there's nothing wrong with that either. While SA1's level design is great in its own right, SA2's speed stages still retain the same precise controls and abilities and really perfect that addiction and replay value down to a T. In large part thanks to the game's positive reinforcement of skillful gameplay through the points for tricks and new ranking system. In every Sonic game, you were always scored based on the amount of rings collected, enemies killed, and time completed. SA2 is the first game to actually contextualize that score, giving you a rank of E to A depending on the amount. For me at least, this is a huge factor as to why SA2 is so fun to play and replay. It's something that goes for any game when making it enjoyable, giving the player positive reinforcement for doing well. I do understand though that some people prefer not to have the ranking system, because it works in the other way too, negative reinforcement for doing poorly. Honestly, this is an easy one. All you need to do is have an option to disable ranks appearing at the end of levels and everybody's happy. So, SA2 speed stages are a great example of how you can do something different with the same fundamentals. They are without a doubt a worthy successor to what came before, but even then, I still prefer SA1 stages by just a smidge, the more open and varied level design and unchained spin dash being the main factors. Still, the next time an adventure style title comes along, a speed stage style that combines the best of both worlds could make for the best 3D Sonic gameplay we've ever seen, because SA2's stages definitely made a lot of valuable contributions on their own. The hunting stages make their return from SA1 with another newcomer, Rouge the Bat, sharing the style with Knuckles. However, this time it isn't only the Master Emerald shards that are being hunted. There could also be keys or even the Chaos Emeralds themselves, and these stages do a really great job at fleshing out the style. Knuckles' punch, or in Rouge's case, her kick, returns from SA1 but expanded and improved. In SA1, you hit the button 3 times to perform a powerful punch. In SA2, it's much the same, but you do different punches depending on your speed. If going slow, the character will perform an uppercut. If going fast, they'll perform running punches, ending in a forward spiral attack, which actually homes in on enemies. This replaces Knuckles' ball roll from SA1. This means not only can you maintain your speed when attacking enemies on the ground, but because this move has a high set speed, you can use it to immediately reach top speed as soon as you pass the threshold to use the attack. I've come to use this all the time to gain and maintain my flow through a stage. The glide also returns, a little faster and more responsive than before, as well as the wall climbing, which now attaches to the wall a bit quicker. A new move is an upward spiral attack which you can activate by spinning the stick and hitting the action button. My favorite addition to Knuckles and Rouge's moveset is the downward spiral dive, which is activated by hitting the action button in the air. You immediately gain a huge amount of downward momentum with a great amount of mid-air control, and you're able to chain a glide out of it. This move is vital because of how vertical the hunting stages are in this game. It, together with the glide, facilitates speedy traversal of huge amounts of space. But the returning digging move also works off of the dive, in which you will drill straight into surfaces that can be dug in. In SA1, shards hidden in the ground were very easy to find thanks to the precise radar and clearly telegraphed dig locations, often denoted by a circle of rings. In SA2 though, it's less clear where exactly a shard will be hidden, since it isn't as clearly telegraphed and because of the less precise radar. But something actually good that the GameCube version of SA2 added was an exclamation point over the character's head when you were right on top of the shard. This really helps in cutting down the amount of time digging trying to find the shard. I dare say it was even a necessary addition for a few piece locations. And speaking of the radar system, the biggest change from SA1 is how it works. In SA1, the radar could pick up on any of the 3 pieces at any time. However, in SA2, it only picks up 1 piece at a time. I suspect this was done to pad out the length of the stages, but it feels pretty artificial and forces you to go through the same areas you might have already traversed again and again. Though you can totally find the other emerald shards out of order if you happen to see them, or have memorized the many possible locations they can be in, something I haven't done. Though the size and glowiness of the pieces have been reduced compared to SA1, making them harder to spot without the radar. The stages would have been just fine if the radar worked like it did in SA1, and SA2's radar is also less precise than SA1's radar. In SA1, the radar would progressively beat faster and had 5 stages of detection denoted by color and size, making it really easy to tell how far away you were from a shard. But in SA2, there are only 3 stages that all have their own set speeds. Well, 4 if you count the exclamation point. The new radar system seems to be a big turnoff to people, but honestly, I really don't mind it much. Think about it, the hunting stages are all about making use of the controls to speedily and efficiently hunt for the shards as fast as you can. When you take into account the improved and added moves that are used to enhance your flow, that it just feels good to control the character, and that most levels are built for quick sweeping of the same area over and over, asking for more traversal of the levels really isn't a big deal for me. The level design of the hunting stages this time around is much more interesting and fun to traverse. The size of the stages this time around is massively increased, particularly vertically, but to account for this you have a moveset to accommodate that as I've gone into, but also the addition of rocket pads and springs everywhere to quickly go up. Simply put, the hunting stages in SA2 really put emphasis on verticality, with some exceptions, but I'll go into individual levels later. And because of this verticality, one of the most fun things you can do is travel to the top of a level, like Meteor Herd in Mad Space, and drill dive all the way back down. An element of the levels that's been expanded from SA1 is that sometimes in the hunting stages you'll be able to get close to a piece, but you won't immediately be able to access it, instead needing to do some kind of action first, like hitting a switch to open the safe it's in. And sometimes pieces even have mini challenges to even getting them, like a piece being placed under a giant weight or between hazards. And the hunting stages do well to make each stage unique with their own ideas or gimmicks. One such gimmick is that a few stages actually feature swimming. You hold the action button to descend and hold the jump button to ascend. Unlike some other games with swimming levels, the hunting stages are never entirely swimming based for the most part, instead are just small areas within the levels. In Aquatic Mine you can even control the amount of water you want. I know water levels or segments aren't exactly loved in games, but SA2 doesn't overuse it at all, instead serving as very brief sections that shake up the gameplay a bit or provide for an interesting challenge, while the swimming itself is relatively fast. And while we're talking about water, yet another thing I wish I touched on in my Sonic Adventure 1 analysis is the drowning theme. Many people will instantly have flashbacks to their time as a kid playing Sonic games when underwater, with your air slowly running out, instilling anxiety, only to then hear that damn drowning theme. It's much the same in SA1 and 2, wherever there is water, only much worse. Needless to say, this got me good when I was a kid, and made the hunting stages with water uniquely tense. One last major addition to the hunting stages are hint monitors that will give you hints to the locations of pieces. You can only activate one at first, waiting a little bit before you can activate another one. The first hint is always cryptic, and with each successive hint, they'll get more specific. The hint boxes decrease the score you get when you find the current emerald shard by 1 stage. And the score allotted when you find a shard is based on the amount of time you found it in. You can still get A ranks using multiple hint boxes though, but the more you use, the more you're going to have to rely on your time completion bonus for a good rank. So overall, I think SA2's hunting stages are a big improvement over SA1's, and I definitely prefer them. Even with the inferior radar system, the improved level design, varied challenges and gimmicks, and expanded moveset make these a real joy for me to play. It's funny, you could almost consider that all of SA1's exploration value was poured into SA2's hunting stages. And honestly, I think I might enjoy playing SA2's hunting stages just as much as SA2's speed stages, if not more so. When just casually replaying the game and going to the stage select, I think I may very well fire up these stages just as much as the speed stages. SA2's hunting stages put a particular emphasis on replayability with the randomized emerald shards, such that you must master the controls and level assets to adapt to the different shard locations. That replayability and testing of how well you adapt could be pushed even further if you started in a different location every time you played the stage. I honestly cannot understand or relate to the hate these stages get. The way you're supposed to play these stages ends up being pretty much identical to how the speed stages are played, in that you must master the controls, moves, and level design to maintain a smooth flow of momentum to complete the stage in the most efficient way possible. What's so different? The non-linearity? Isn't that exactly why stuff like Sonic Utopia is given so much praise? The climbing? If that's it, why isn't it a problem with the 2D games? Were this style to return, I'd welcome it with open arms, because I know that I really enjoyed it. I love SA2's hunting stages for their openness, replayability, and high skill ceiling. The shooting stages return from SA1 and are fittingly given to Tails and Eggman, whom we get to play as in a core game for the first time. I can understand the disappointment of not getting to play as Tails on foot, as his gameplay was great in SA1. It is really sad to not get to see it fleshed out in this game, but having Tails operate a machine is a logical path for his character. Ever since his debut, he's always been flying the Tornado, making use of technology and his abnormally high intelligence. So him harnessing his intelligence and creating a new mech is a logical evolution of his arc from SA1. This doesn't mean we have to ditch Tails' on-foot gameplay for the future though, but I don't have a problem with the shooting style being given to him for this game. The changes to this style between SA1 and 2 are really an evenly mixed bag. Because of the nature of Tails and Eggman's mechs, the movement controls are a bit more unwieldy. Turning in a circular motion is more obtuse this time around. What's interesting though is that, like Gamma, you can aim independently of the legs of the mechs. The upper body of the mech works on a swivel, which means even though turning around movement-wise is a bit harder, you can still aim 360 degrees easily. The mech's jumps are lower and shorter than Gamma's, which is a shame, but like everything else with SA2, cons come with pros in equal amount. The movement speed is still very fast, except uphill, and even if the basic jumps are shorter, the booster or hover power-up is improved from SA1. Now its activation is faster and can be used to preserve some of your upward or forward momentum from a jump, allowing you to reach slightly higher. I also find myself jumping and hovering to make sharp turns easier. The gameplay is still based on locking onto as many enemies as you can within the time the targeting laser is active and releasing to wreak havoc. However, this time there's no time limit, and instead your reward for combos on enemies feeds into your score. Something worth noting is that you shouldn't target over 11 enemies, as 11 will net you the maximum score of 2000. After 11, you should release and begin a new combo. And we have yet another example of how bad port jobs can affect the experience, and that the targeting laser sound and Tails' jump grunt can be really grating. The sound effect mod takes care of the laser sound, but Tails' jump voice is still way too loud for something you're going to be hearing over and over. Whereas in the Dreamcast version, not only was it much quieter, but he also had a second jump grunt. The same applies to Eggman. For both characters, there's a power-up that will increase the blast radius of laser blasts, which can be very useful for netting a higher score, but also hitting multiple item boxes with just one laser blast. A small addition is front-mounted cannons that fire linear projectiles to shoot destructible objects that aren't targetable. It's fired simply by pressing the action button. This is used to destroy boxes and comes in particularly handy during the character boss fights, though sometimes you may accidentally take out an enemy you meant to target, so you have to train yourself to aim slightly away as you begin your target combo. Additionally, there's an attack reserved for point-blank range. For Tails, it's a little torpedo thing, but for Eggman, it's literally a spring-loaded boxing glove, complete with a boing sound effect. Good old Doctor. For the first time in a Sonic game, we actually have health bars. You still collect rings in the stages, but you use them to refill your health bar in small increments. This adds an element of endurance to the shooting stages, and I think that makes sense given the amount of enemies and hazards, so you can't just rely on invincibility frames and one ring to get through. Unlike with SA1, the enemies are a lot more proactive in shooting and attacking you, so you're not just accounting for targeting as many enemies as possible, but also evading their attacks. And because the mechs will be knocked back upon getting hit, that means platforming over death pits is a lot riskier. And because of this, again, it's a shame that the movement of the mechs doesn't work like Gamma's, because I feel like it would synergize well with the gameplay of evading enemies' attacks and make it more fun and interesting. With the exception of Prison Lane, the shooting levels do well to give a wide amount of space to maneuver when you need it. They're at their best when they're either very spacious or have you moving downward, as this allows the mechs to really show their speed and let you play around with the hover mechanic, as you consider when to start hovering to target enemies and when to continue falling to avoid their attacks. There are a few auto-scroller sections in the levels that serve as short breathers, where the timing of your targeting is tested explicitly. Something that plagues the mech stages though are cheap enemy placements. Very often enemies will drop right in front of you, or fighter jets will bomb the path you're walking on, force you to take a hit or even die if you don't know they're coming. I don't know why these enemies are designed this way, and needless to say, it's very annoying. The mechs in SA2 are a real toss-up. I think Gamma's SA1 stages controlled better and had a much smoother flow, but SA2's are a lot meatier, if you know what I mean. They're more replayable with the score and ranking system, and in that they're longer, the enemies are much more interesting to face in that you must both combo them and evade their attacks, and the improved hover can add some nice depth. Without a doubt, if you just give the mechs Gamma's smooth movement and jump height while designing the levels around that, and maybe don't have the mechs lose as much speed when moving uphill, these stages would be superior by far. And I think people would be more receptive to the style if the base movement was generally more unchained, like it is with the speed and hunting stages. But even as the mech stages are right now, the constant flow of movement and action combined with the strategic targeting and timing of locking on enemies to let loose and destroy everything in sight make this style very fun and satisfying to me. And with that, we have a stalemate. I prefer SA1's speed stages, SA2's hunting stages, and both games' shooting stages are equal to me. But that's not really a bad thing though, right? SA2's gameplay manages to do something different with the same fundamentals while also making definite improvements in a lot of areas. One thing I've noticed on the internet is that there's really no consensus on which game is better among anybody, SA1 or 2. I constantly see people passionately going on about how SA1 is better than 2, or 2 is better than 1, and I think that's actually a beautiful thing. These two games use the same fundamental philosophy, but both manage to do something different with them. Some might prefer the freedom that is given to them with SA1, but others might prefer the refinement that SA2 provides. And concerning people who don't say the adventure games are good, with seeing some people talk about them on the internet, some of the reasons they come up with as evidence that these games aren't good baffle me. Like, their tolerance for challenge, failure, or even legitimate issues drops dramatically when playing SA1 and 2, or even Sonic games in general. Similarly, it's like their standards for what constitutes a good game rise unreasonably high. Why am I going so slow? Gotta go fast and I gotta go to sleep, Sonic. Wait, what's that in the corner? Nah, it's nothing. Man, what's with these platforms? Such bad design. At least Mario 64 had guardrails. Man, where do I go? It can't possibly be through that door right behind me, which will unlock when I kill these enemies, which the game has repeatedly taught me to do to unlock doors. I am so lost. Such bad design. I don't... What is this? I don't get how... Why? It's like a wall that's invisible that I don't understand. What is with this running speed? It's way too wild for this tiny enclosed canyon. This doesn't help me travel faster at all. Such bad design.
Hey!
How could the game do that to me? To be sure, both of these games do have their flaws and shortcomings, but as someone who's had this entire video up to this point, and their whole life to take a hard look into these games, they're not any more flawed by any sort of standard we want to pretend is objective than any other games that we popularly accept as good games. If we apply this standard of what counts as a good game, then Mario 64 is terrible for its repetitive, lackluster boss fights, swimming levels, booting out of levels, and reusing of music. Ocarina of Time is terrible for its long, unskippable button-mashing cutscenes, shoddy aiming controls, Water Temple, and Navi. And Resident Evil 4 is terrible for its limiting movement controls, slow aiming, half a game-long escort mission, and focus more on action than horror. You see what I mean? It's easy to just pick out flaws in a game and blow them up to such a ridiculous degree to portray the game in question as lesser for it, and at worst, as I illustrated with that little skit, even fabricate flaws. But then why does this happen to Sonic more than seemingly any other game series? Honestly, I think people are just more inclined to judge Sonic games more harshly because of the franchise's blunders being so well known, namely in Sonic 06, with some Shadow the Hedgehog presentation and localization, and boom, thrown into the mix. So people enjoy ripping on such an easy target to boost themselves and the games they like up by tearing something else down. Feels good to milk that locale, am I right? That's not to say everyone who criticizes SA1 and 2 harshly are just doing it for the lulz or are misinformed about them. For example, plenty of classic Sonic fans were put off by the direction SA1 and 2 took with their gameplay. To put it bluntly, neither SA1 or 2 are perfect translations of the 2D games into 3D, but they still maintain the same fundamentals and philosophy, in that they're very fast-paced platformers making use of momentum physics that invite the player to perfect their flow through a level. Changes they make from there don't make them any less great games in their own rights. The same is true of Mario 64 and Sunshine. Those games weren't a full translation of the 2D gameplay into 3D, but they're still great games with their own ideas specifically tailored to the strengths of 3D gameplay. SA1 and 2 are no different. Changes these games do make, such as unchaining the spin dash, make sense in 3D because using it right requires more than just holding right and timing jumps. 3D requires a great amount of spatial awareness and mastery of movement with full 3D control, so making the spin dash easier to activate is justified. The use of more bottomless pits is fine because unlike in 2D, you can clearly see if something is a bottomless pit. Add on to that the increased mid-air control and the homing attack to correct jumps, the game is properly designed to accommodate such hazards. My point is, I don't consider exactly translating the 2D gameplay as the standard as to whether or not these games are good, and I think that does a great disservice to them and their own unique ideas. And honestly, I think the adventure games better capture what it would feel like to be Sonic without sacrificing fluidity and freedom like the Boost games do. That's not at all to say the classics are lesser games for this, but like I said in my SA1 video, even if it requires more skill to manage, 3D actually lends itself better to such fast-paced gameplay in that you can see what's coming ahead, and don't have to rely on memory, and have a much wider array of movement. Couple that with the Unchained Spin Dash in addition to stuff like the homing attack and bounce attack, which give you even more maneuverability and freedom, and we have what I consider to be the perfect formula for 3D Sonic, or at least the perfect thing for future games to expand on. Anyway, here are some things that every stage in the game features that I'd like to talk about. In every stage there is a hidden robot called the Golden Gun Beetle, which will net 1000 points for killing. But it'll disappear after a couple of seconds, so you gotta get it as quick as you can. This robot comes in particularly handy for getting a better rank in the hunting stages, so I recommend always getting it if you can. In most of the speed and hunting stages, there are small items that you can pick up, and every stage has their own unique item. Like, I have no idea why these things are here, as they don't serve any purpose. There's a small new feature added for the speed and hunting stages where if you almost run off a ledge at a high elevation, you'll come to an immediate halt at the edge, so it's just a small feature to prevent running straight off ledges to your death. In the same vein, characters will now grab onto ledges if you just barely miss your jump onto it. Replacing Tikal as the game's tutorial function is Omochao, functionally identical in that it's placed around relevant areas, and once activated it tells you information about the game, levels, and mechanics without stopping the action. You can end up accidentally activating him at times, but I suspect the devs were fully aware of how Omochao could be annoying, so they let you directly interact with him. For one thing, you can straight up attack Omochao, which will shut him up for a second, but when he wakes back up, he won't be too pleased. But hey, he stays down long enough for you to run away. You can also pick him up, which will similarly result in a whole slew of reactions from him. In addition to that, he'll respond kindly if you put him down gently. But you can also throw him. Even off the stage if you want. And in not just every stage, but even in some cutscenes if you press certain buttons, Big the Cat makes cameo appearances. A lot of them. There's no reason why he's in any of these places or somehow even ends up on the Space Colony arc. It's just a funny little Easter egg and callback to SA1. If the adventure style is ever continued, this has to become an Easter egg tradition of having Big inexplicably in the background of every stage. I just love all these little attentions to detail. Power-ups this time around are found in the stages themselves, but you can't get all power-ups within a single playthrough. Certain power-ups like Tails and Eggman's upgraded laser blasters, or Shadow's flame ring, are only accessible once you get other power-ups. So it facilitates looking around the levels for secrets upon replaying, though exploring in the speed and shooting stages can prove harder than in SA1, because while you can turn the camera, the moment you move it will snap back toward the direction the level flows. And there's no manual mode option like there is in Sonic Adventure DX. They really should have just set the camera to immediately switch to manual once you hit one of the triggers, and then map some kind of other button to switch the camera back to automatic mode. Kind of like Wind Waker in the way its camera system works. Because of the way it works, most of the time the camera is actually better than SA1, but sometimes when trying to go backwards or reach some place that is far off the main path, it's much worse. Anyway, while we're on the subject of power-ups, every character can find a power-up called the Mystic Melody, which is used at small altars in every level to either access alternate routes or access hidden areas which are used in the extra missions. And let's go into those extra missions. Every stage in the game has 5 optional missions, the first of which is just speeding the basic stage. The second is to collect 100 rings. The third is to find a Chao that is hidden within the stage somewhere, often requiring the Mystic Melody. The fourth is to complete the stage within a time limit, and the fifth is really interesting. The stage assets, enemy types and locations, hazards, trick spots, and more are all altered to create more of a challenge and really shake things up, aptly named Hard Mode. But in the hunting stages, the emerald locations are all now set and static, but are all now puzzles or challenges to merely collect the pieces themselves. And I just want to say I love the world map the stage select shows. It's got this really cool, simple style that ties all the levels together nicely, even without adventure fields. For collecting all 180 emblems, which requires A ranking every single mission and every single stage, you're rewarded with a whole nother level, a fully 3D Green Hill Zone, complete with fully modeled classic enemies, familiar set pieces, and even the classic sound effects. This is the closest we've ever gotten to a 3D Sonic 1 remake! The stage is awesome, even if SA2's automatic camera system doesn't gel well with the more open layout of the stage, emulating the original level design. Even if you think A-ranking all missions for Green Hill isn't worth it, you gotta admit that it's nice the game provides for new challenges or even alterations to the stages in a game that's already built for being played over and over again, and that at the end of all that, we get a classic level being fully realized in 3D. For me, since I consider every Sonic game from Sonic 1 to Adventure 2 to make up the golden era of Sonic, I find coming full circle with Green Hill at the end of it all perfect. Before it was overused to the point where the iconography became completely meaningless and disconnected from South Island. And for the first time ever, with the stage select, we're shown where South Island is in relation to the rest of the world. Well, I mean, as much as a drifting island can have its general location nailed down. A neat little touch is that you can actually customize the menu style and voice to a specific character, who all have their own unique lines for each menu interaction. In the Chao World Black Market, you can even buy an Amy and a Maria theme, something which I didn't even know was a thing until recording this footage. Good thing I had so many rings collected up to that point. Unlike SA1, SA2 features 2-player split-screen multiplayer, which has been expanded in the battle version of the game. The mode features all gameplay styles of the game: speed, hunting, shooting, Chao karate, Chao races, and kart racing. All the main characters are identical to their counterparts in terms of stats, but we get new characters to play as with unique attributes that are exclusive to this mode. So this means you can have a totally equal fight if you want, but if you're interested in shaking things up, you can mix and match with the extra characters. And what's more, the main characters all have alternate costumes, some even with their own gameplay attributes, allowing you to shake things up even more. My favorites are Tails' red and yellow costume, which calls back to the old Tornado's color scheme, Military Eggman, and Risque Rouge. Damn. In this mode, you have access to special moves that you can only use here. The player in second place will be able to use more powerful attacks at a lower cost, the more they fall behind, though handicaps can be toned down in the options. And again, this game doesn't properly take advantage of the multiple face buttons, as all special attacks are mapped to the action button. So if you have access to one, you can't use the action button without activating it. Had the special power function been mapped to something else, it could have given more depth to matches in that you could actively save attacks for certain moments to fuck over the other player in the nastiest way possible. Also with this mode, both players are free to attack and kill each other as much as they please, so be prepared for hilarity as both players fall down the rabbit hole of endless spawn killing. The speed stages are exactly what you'd expect, though a lot of the stages have been simplified and made slightly shorter. But there are 2 multiplayer exclusive stages. One is an extended version of the boarding section of City Escape with unique layout, ramp placements, and a snowy landscape and mountainous background, with an instrumental version of Escape from the City to boot. The other is almost entirely grinding based, where you ride rails from the outside of the pyramid to the depths inside. A neat thing about this stage is that you can engage in riskier but faster strats to jump off of high rails and land on rails below to catch up to or get ahead of your opponent. I know this isn't really relevant, but can I mention just how friggin' amazing the texture work is in this level? I mean, the art for the environments in SA2 are amazing either way, but this level in particular looks incredible. The pyramid in the distance looks like it would be a skybox element, right? Get closer and you find out that it's a fully 3D modeled asset that you can go inside and everything. Something you can do to troll the other player behind you is to intentionally not hit checkpoints, so they'll have to restart from much further behind if they die, though the same also goes for you. The 2 extra characters here are Amy and Metal Sonic. Amy is slower and has less base abilities, but can activate special attacks at a lower cost. Metal Sonic can't use any special attacks, but can block special attacks from the other player, and moves very fast and jumps very high. Remember when I talked about Amy's movement acceleration in Sonic Adventure 1? Well, her acceleration in this game is exactly what I said I wanted. Because in SA2, since her top speed is much slower than the other characters, her acceleration is much faster. This is a look at how I'd like Amy to play. Now, I don't think she should ever be canonically capable of running at blissing speeds or homing attacking like Sonic and Shadow can, since it's already been established that she isn't physically gifted like them, at least not in the same way. But Amy in SA2's multiplayer is the perfect example as to how Amy's basic movement should be. And if she ever becomes playable again, which she should, you can find a million other ways to make her fun to play than just making her a Sonic clone. So let's talk about the special abilities of the speed characters unlocked by collecting rings. The first, least expensive ability is a huge boost in acceleration and top speed. The second is an attack that hits the other player no matter how far ahead they are, obviously slowing them down and making them lose their rings. The third is where things get really trolly. You outright freeze time, stopping the other player in their tracks. This can result in some real laughs, especially when both players time stop each other at the same time, though the frozen player can make the counter go down much faster with button mashing, so at least it doesn't lock them out of the game completely. The hunting stages are our best 2 out of 3 challenge of who can find the emerald shards faster, and like the main game, only one is trackable at a time, but you can still find the other out of order if you see it. Dry Lagoon and Wild Canyon are both lit differently, being at different times of day, giving the stages an altered look. It would have been cool if all the stages had their looks altered like this, or had slightly different variations with different looks. Like, imagine City Escape at night, or Radical Highway during the day. The 2 extra characters are Tikal and Chaos Zero, acting as a very nice callback to SA1. Tikal is the fastest of them all, but has the weakest attacks. Chaos is the inverse of that, slowest of them all but has the strongest attacks. Kind of a missed opportunity that Chaos didn't have the fastest swimming out of everybody else, considering he's made out of water. It would have been something cool to counteract his otherwise slowest movement. Of the special abilities, the first is pounding the ground, making the other character lose their balance. The second attack hits the character regardless of where they are and makes them dizzy and throws off their movement controls. The third is the beloved time stop. The shooting levels are either an obstacle course race to the goal ring in a linear level path, or a shootout to drain the opponent's health bar in an arena decked out with assets. In the latter, for most of the levels, both players share the same screen, and the camera zooms out the further apart they are, a la Smash Bros. In this style, every single level is exclusive to the multiplayer. The 2 extra characters in this style are, funnily enough, both Chao, a neutral Chao and a dark Chao. The neutral Chao has the weakest attacks and defense, but is the fastest, while the dark Chao is the slowest with the higher attack and defense. A funny little detail I love is the Chao Walker description says it's something Tails invented to help Chao fight, which I can actually see him doing if the Chao were ever endangered by someone, like angry echidnas winning their emeralds. Subsequently, the Dark Chao Walker's description says it was created by Eggman. Damn, could you imagine if Eggman actually raised Chao, turned them into Dark Chao, and had them fight for him just like his robots do? Imagine Sonic's reaction to seeing Chao trying to kill him. One of the Dark Chao Walker's attacks is actually literally called Hell Bomber.
So Reggie, zero getting into Dark This is a kid's game!
For the mech special attacks, the first is a flurry of laser blasts, the second is a load of homing rockets, and the third is a giant fuck off fire in my laser beam. 2 more modes in the multiplayer include Chao Racing and Chao Karate, which you pit your Chao against each other. Pretty self-explanatory. I'll go into detail with the Chao shortly. The last mode is Kart Racing, with all 6 main characters playable, all with their own stats. There are actually DLC carts, special characters, and tracks. All this extra stuff was downloadable content even back on the Dreamcast version, though sadly the HD ports don't have the extra tracks, so there are only 3 available. This mode is featured shortly in the story mode for both Hero and Dark, so most of the stuff I'll explain applies there as well. It's pretty basic stuff, but there is some nice depth to it. The most important thing, and the key to doing well, is collecting 20 rings to gain a burst in speed. You also have 2 modes, Normal and Drifting, which are self-explanatory. You can begin drifting simply by letting go of the accelerate button and holding it again immediately while turning. Now, don't quote me on this, as I don't know if this is actually true, but I feel like in normal mode you accelerate much faster, while in drifting mode you preserve your speed if you quickly and continuously veer left and right, something that's actually a strat with speedrunners. So I use normal mode to gain speed, and drift mode to not only make sharper turns, but also to maintain the speed I gain from a boost. It's a simple kart racing side mode, but I think there is some nice depth that provides for a higher skill ceiling. So overall, what's not to love about SA2's multiplayer? It's a whole slew of extra content you can enjoy with another person, whether that's actually competitive action or just messing about and trolling each other. It's just a shame that with the game coming to modern platforms, they didn't add any sort of official online function to the multiplayer. Whoo boy, so here we go. Ladies and gentlemen, the Chao Garden. Where do you even begin with something so deep and complex? There's no way I'm going to be able to explain all aspects of the Chao Garden in perfect detail, but I'll go over what I think is the most important. If you really want to dive into the intricacies of the Chao system, I'll link a YouTuber called Sapphire Chao's channel in the description, as she's pretty much the authority when it comes to this stuff. Since there are no adventure fields in Sonic Adventure 2, the Chao Gardens this time around are accessible by grabbing a key in every stage in the game. After you complete the stage, you'll be sent to the Chao World with that character, even if you're playing through the story mode. But outside of story mode, the Chao World is accessible via stage select, and you must find a key once with every character to unlock them in the stage select for the Chao World. The keys are located inside of blue Chao boxes in every stage. What's more, each stage has 3 Chao boxes each, If you grab the key out of the first, the second will contain 4 tiny animals respective to the stage, and the third will contain a single special animal. I'll go into more detail with the tiny animals later. And since all main characters are playable in the Chao world, that includes Tails and Eggman. Tails is actually my favorite character to use in the Chao world, mostly because he's the best at using an exploit I'll talk about later, but also because he can, of course, fly. Infinitely, I might add. Eggman in the Chao world, though, is really weird. In a good way. Seeing him interact with these small cutesy creatures is so surreal. And so is seeing him able to run so damn fast. Seriously though, look up Eggman and City Escape. It's hilarious. So basically, the Chao are virtual pets that are highly customizable, partly through the use of chaos drives and tiny animals, which alter your Chao's stats and looks. To get the most out of the Chao Garden requires replaying the main stages for those animals and chaos drives, but also for rings, which are used to buy things for the Chao Garden. Generally, speed stages are best for collecting rings, hunting stages are best for collecting tiny animals, and shooting stages are best for collecting chaos drives. But that's only part of it when it comes to Chao customization. Introduced in the Dreamcast version of SA2 is the alignment system. As SA2 featured 2 main stories, Hero and Dark, the Chao will take on an angelic or a devilish appearance depending on the character you interact with them as, and how you treat them. So Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles will turn Chao into Hero Chao, and Eggman, Shadow, and Rouge will turn them into Dark Chao. All newborn Chao start out as neutral, and will inch towards one side with each interaction. So if you treat a Chao kindly with a hero character, it will gradually become a Hero Chao. However, if you abuse your Chao as a hero character, they will move towards becoming a Dark Chao, and vice versa with the Dark characters. An interesting thing is, individual Chao will remember all of this, and will grow fond of a specific character if treated well by them, and grow to hate a specific character if abused by them. Moreover, their behavior will change depending on how they're treated, and if you treat a Chao poorly, they'll die at the end of their life cycle. But if you give them a happy life, they'll instead reincarnate into an egg, their name and all of their genetic attributes remaining the same. But as all Chao start out as neutral, it's entirely possible to keep them in the neutral alignment as well. But it requires balancing interactions between hero and dark characters to keep them within the neutral threshold. It would have been nice if there was an extra character who didn't affect a Chao's alignment at all, so it'd be easier to not only get a neutral Chao, but care for baby Chao of both alignments at the same time, since you wouldn't have to constantly switch between hero and dark. I mean, unless you're okay with abusing your Chao to make their alignment go in the opposite direction. Maybe Amy could have fit this role? Her character is definitely one of the hero alignment, but for the sake of an extra character in this side mode, it would have been nice. And as you make Hero and Dark Chao, you will unlock 2 respective gardens, aptly with a Heaven and Hell look. The Dark Chao garden literally having a pool of blood. The Hero Garden is actually my favorite because I think its color scheme and music is easy on the eyes and ears. Both the Hero and Dark Gardens had way more interesting layouts in the Dreamcast version, so I'm not sure why they changed it in every port since. Maybe just so it'd be easier to find your Chao since it's more straightforward. As you're going to be spending a lot of time in each garden, the theme from SA1 has been reprised into 3 versions for each garden, but its intensity has been toned down. As much as I liked SA1's garden theme, this is definitely for the better. Now that I've laid out the basics, let's go into more detail. Chaos drives are dropped by gun robots, and are used to increase a certain stat in the Chao in small increments. And since the majority of enemies in SA2 are now gun robots, tiny animals are now hidden all throughout each stage, and each stage has its own selection of animals. So stages with lots of water will contain many swim animals, and stages at high altitudes will contain many fly animals. Each animal will increase a stat or a set of stats a higher amount than the chaos drives, but can also decrease some stats. But even then, a stat will never actually go down a level, only its experience bar will drain. With each animal given to the Chao, it'll gain some of its physical traits, allowing for a crazy amount of combinations. If you want to increase a certain stat without altering your Chao's look, you're gonna have to use chaos drives. There are a slew of animals that don't specialize in any particular stat though. Animals marked by blue are more of a jack of all trades. Animals marked by black are similar but all have special uses. The bat removes the Chao's legs, making it look like a ghost. The half-fish turns the Chao's emotion ball into a flame. The skeleton dog is the most useful one, removing physical traits gained from animals, and allowing Chao to wear hats. The final animal class is a gold class of mythical animals such as a dragon, unicorn, and phoenix, who are mostly all-rounders but give a higher stat boost than the other animals. What's more, Chao will start performing behaviors respective to the animals you give them. Honestly, I think the stat gain from each individual chaos drive and animal is way too low, but funnily enough, it's a glitch that comes to the rescue and makes the Chao raising much more reasonable. Normally, when giving a Chao a chaos drive or animal, it'll be used up and you won't be able to use it again. But if you simply drop it in front of the Chao, they'll absorb it, but you'll still be able to use it. And so with the cycle of picking up and dropping over and over, the process is 10, 20, or 30 times faster than it would be otherwise. I dare say this glitch is the Chao Garden's saving grace, because otherwise raising a Chao would prove extremely grindy. I mean, that's not to say doing this for several minutes isn't grindy, but it's the kind of grind I can buy into, because it's all for making my Chao as perfect as possible. But why would you invest so much time into raising stats in the first place? Well, aside from the racing and karate modes, stats play a huge role in the customization of your Chao. Every Chao has 4 main stats: swim, fly, run, and power. The more of one stat you raise, the more your Chao is inclined toward that attribute. So if you feed your Chao a bunch of power type animals or chaos drives, it'll begin to take on the unique appearance of a power type Chao. Influence it towards run, a run type Chao. And the higher a stat is, the Chao will use an animation more suited to their higher skill level in that area. So if you don't want to hear your Chao constantly drowning in water, you should probably raise their swim stat a bit. After a certain amount of time spent in the garden, your Chao will enter a cocoon and become an adult Chao, solidifying it as the type you influenced it towards. Hero, neutral, and dark will also become solidified, and Chao will gain unique appearances and emotion bubbles to suit them. You can make your Chao reach adult evolution faster by feeding it fruits and nuts, which will also increase its stamina. Stamina, by the way, is the only stat that doesn't alter appearance. And every alignment, neutral, hero, dark all have their own versions of every stat type. But interestingly, without enough stat influence in any direction, your Chao can simply evolve to be a normal type Chao. But what if we went even deeper? Once your Chao is an adult with an appearance respective to its stat type, they'll continue to evolve gradually over time depending on the stats you influence from there. So if we want a neutral aligned fly type Chao, we could just leave it alone, and it will evolve its appearance accordingly within the fly type family. But we could also keep influencing fly, which will take it in another direction. But what if we influence toward run? Let's go even further! In addition to maximizing run influence, let's maximize swim influence as well, so both stats have equal influence. So once it's done with its gradual adult evolution, we end up with a neutral slash fly slash run plus swim Chao with a very unique appearance. But the possibilities are endless. We could make a hero slash power slash run plus fly Chao, a dark slash run slash swim plus run Chao, a neutral slash power Chao, a hero slash neutral slash swim Chao, a dark slash swim slash power plus fly Chao, a neutral slash run Chao, and that's not even counting all the combinations of animal traits, if they're a monotone or shiny Chao, a two-tone color Chao, or two-tone shiny Chao, and chaos Chao! Folks, I think we got something good on our hands. This shit is fucking crazy. The amount of customization, uniqueness, and variation is astounding. And that's not even the end of it when it comes to how unique each individual Chao can be. There are 2 hidden stats, luck and intelligence. According to the Chao Island website, they determine your Chao's likelihood of success in certain situations and races. Both animals and chaos drives increase these stats, but apparently chaos drives increase the luck stat twice as much as animals. Every Chao is born with a unique facial expression that may be influenced by the personality it is also assigned with, such as crybaby, naive, smart, or curious, and more. The personalities affect their behavior in the gardens, and apparently they can even have up to 3 personality values at a time. This also affects what kind of fruit they'll like. Additionally, all Chao have different stat grades as to how competent they are within a single stat, so even if 2 Chao are both level 99 in swim, one is still going to be better at it than the other. If you want the perfect Chao with the perfect grades in every stat, you're gonna have to invest in breeding. Chao can mate as soon as they reach adulthood and will enter a mating season a few hours after evolving. But if you don't want to wait, you can buy a heart fruit from the black market and feed it to 2 Chao to immediately initiate them to begin mating. All you have to do once a ring of flowers appears around one Chao is place the other Chao next to it and they'll produce an egg. As both parents will pass down their range of stat grades, you'll want to keep breeding Chao with the best stat grades as they appear until you have the perfect specimen. Don't worry, incest isn't a thing. You can also take advantage of Chao passing down their genetics to get some really unique looking Chao, such as breeding a blue monotone Chao with a default 2-tone Chao, to get a 2-toned blue Chao. It's all very complicated stuff. If you want to know more, link is in the description for Sapphire Chow's channel, where you can find a video going into the mechanics of genetics and inheritance. But the looks and stats of the Chao aren't the only things that you can influence. From the Chao lobby, you can go to the Chao kindergarten, which contains a whole bunch of useful stuff, particularly a classroom which you can send up to 4 Chao to learn a new behavior, with some being able to be leveled up the more classes the Chao takes in it. Once you place a Chao in class, it'll take several minutes before you can take them back out. Weird thing is though, time in class doesn't pass unless you're out of the Chao world. So if you put your Chao in class, the best way to pass time is to gather resources in all the stages in the stage select. In general, the biggest part of the Chao kindergarten is the black market, where you buy items used in the gardens with rings you collect from the stages. The items for stock are random for a certain amount of time, and the more emblems you have, the rarer items will be unlocked to become available. Here you can buy monotone color Chao eggs, as well as more expensive shiny Chao eggs. You can buy Chao fruit, which are insanely useful for increasing all stats of Chao equally. You can buy hats, which Chao will put on their heads. And you can buy seeds, which you can give your Chao to plant in their respective garden, provided they have the shovel from winning one of the races. The seeds will grow into a tree, which will drop fruit, so you don't have to buy that kind from the black market anymore. The kindergarten also includes the doctor's office, where you can view your Chao's stat grades, personality, type, stage in life, and so on. It includes the principal, which will tell you all about the mechanics of the Chao garden, and lastly, the fortune teller, which is used to give nicknames to your Chao. She'll always give you really dumb names the first time, but after that, you can name your Chao yourself. Obviously, my nicknames are much better than anything she can hope to come up with. Accessible from the neutral garden are the Chao races and Chao karate, where the stats of your Chao are put to the test. In Chao racing, oh my god, he's got it again! In Chao racing, you enter one of your Chao from any garden into the race with 7 other Chao. You don't actually control your Chao, their stats determine how well your Chao will do in the race, including the hidden stats of intelligence and luck. But you can cheer your Chao on, which will give them a short burst of speed, at the cost of stamina, which directly corresponds to how high their stamina stat is. But you can't just spam the function, as once your Chao runs out of stamina, it'll start running much more slowly. So you need to strategize using it in situations where you either need to make up for your Chao's mistake, or make up for lackluster stats to gain the edge. There are multiple categories of unique races, tracks, paths, and multiple difficulties within each race. The beginner and dual Chao races' individual tracks all challenge a certain stat, such as a race being based mostly around swimming or a race based mostly around climbing. The only thing I don't like here is that you must clear every single difficulty for every single race for all emblems, which can be extremely tedious. Just in the dual race alone, there are 6 tracks with 5 difficulty levels each, so that adds up to 30 races that must be completed, doing each of the 6 5 times with only minor changes. The challenge, hero, and dark races are when things get really interesting though. Every race in these categories features unique challengers and tracks such as Chaklon, a unique Chao challenger from SA1, literally racing against animals, a Chao parody of the Power Rangers, against a single Chaos Chao, or against... oh my god. The hero and dark races are unique in that you can only enter hero and dark Chao into them respectively, so this means you can't just bulldoze the entire racing mode with just one Chao. You'll be facing off with hero and dark Chao in both modes. The races here actually have unique music fitting to the tone of hero and dark, and the hero races even alter the looks of the tracks to look much spookier. In every category there are prizes to be won, such as a ball, radio, TV, pogo stick, bubble blower, or sonic doll. Half of them simply give your Chao more actions to perform at their leisure, but the others are actually permanent objects that get placed into the gardens every Chao can use. And as I mentioned, you can win a shovel and watering can from 2 of the races, which will allow a Chao to plant and water seeds so you can add more trees with nuts or fruits to the garden. And lastly, your Chao will be awarded medals on their bodies upon winning certain races. Chao Karate is the other mode. Here, your Chao squares off with another Chao. And there are 3 difficulty levels, with 1 extra level named Super Mode, only unlocked after clearing all other difficulties. Like racing, you don't control your Chao here, their stats instead determining how well they'll perform. But both Chao have a zeal bar that goes up and down depending on how well your Chao is doing. If your Chao's zeal drains, they'll become discouraged and you must mash the A button to cheer them on to get them back into the fight. Each match has a 90-second timer, and both Chao have health bars. The one who loses all their health loses the match, but also the Chao that gets knocked out of the arena will automatically lose. Noteworthy here is that Chao with no legs are at a massive disadvantage, as the higher level kick move is much faster than the higher level punching, and obviously Chao with no legs or feet can't kick. But also, funnily enough, the lower level punch can end up being advantageous to exploit ring outs. As long as you keep a Chao's power stat under a certain level, the Chao will only perform lower level punch attacks. Thing is though, these attacks end up being much faster than the higher level punches, so even if it doesn't do any damage to high level opponents, it can still be used to ring them out and win the match. I'll link a video by Sapphire Chao demonstrating this very thing, it's hilarious. Most of the stats have been repurposed for this mode. Swim is now defense, increasing how much damage your Chao can take. Fly is now evasion, increasing your Chao's ability to dodge enemy attacks. Run is now speed, decreasing the amount of time your Chao will take to attack rather than just standing around. Power is self-explanatory, increasing damage output, but also making attacks knock back opponents further, and as mentioned, the higher it is, the more powerful attack animations are unlocked. And lastly, stamina corresponds to the amount of zeal your Chao has. Karate isn't as fleshed out as the races are, but it's still an interesting mode where you can put your Chao's stats to the test. And both racing and karate are required to get all 180 emblems. A lot of people say games that will keep players coming back for years often have elements of creativity to them. I agree with this sentiment looking at games like Halo 3 or Minecraft, but also as that's just what Sonic Adventure 2 demonstrates. When you have such a deep and complex system that allows you to get so creative with such cute little creatures, it's no wonder why the Chao Garden is so beloved. But it's not just the creative aspect of it. That's only half or even just a third of the story. What makes that creativity meaningful is the time and investment it takes to get the kind of Chao and the exact look you want. It's because it requires replaying the main game, mastering it, and investing time to raise the Chao stats and see them gradually change over time is what makes the end result so rewarding. That Chao may look awesome on its own, but most importantly, it's a symbol of the hard work you put into making it perfect. All that stuff is an extremely important aspect that makes getting creative so addictive. I think it's pretty clear, and most people can agree, with a potential new adventure title, a Chao Garden must follow. Because it's not just a disconnected side mode. In both SA1 and 2, the Chao Garden and the main gameplay play off of each other, complement each other, and synergize to elevate the game to the next level. To succeed in the Chao Garden and make the Chao you want, you must replay the main stages, but to get the most out of the main stages for the Chao Gardens, you must learn and master the inherently replayable nature of the game. And because of that, when replaying the story or stages, since the Chao Garden has encouraged you to become a better player, your time replaying the story or levels will be enhanced thanks to the high skill ceiling. Suffice to say, the Chao Gardens take the adventure games to the next level. Despite not making any appearances in any game for years upon years, the mark they've made on the Sonic franchise says enough in and of itself. Next up, let's tackle Sonic Adventure 2's soundtrack. Even though SA1 is my favorite, SA2's soundtrack definitely doesn't disappoint. There's a heavier emphasis on rock and electric guitar, but there's still a wide variety of musical styles and vocal themes. The soundtrack in SA2 was created by a collaboration of composers, namely Jun Senoi, Tomoyo Oteni, Fumie Kumatani, and Kenichi Tokoi, along with several vocal performers. Generally, Jun Senoi handled the rock-focused levels and character themes, Tomoyo Oteni handled the Knuckles level themes, Fumie Kumatani handled Rouge and Shadow's level and character themes, and Kenichi Tokoi handled the event themes, the music that plays during cutscenes. In general, the 2D Sonic game soundtracks were more pop-inspired, jazzy tunes that became amazingly catchy earworms, if I do say so myself. However, with SA1 and 2, the music is driven by long melodies that twist and turn and go up and down, that work to capture the atmosphere of the location or story, to take the listener on a musical journey or adventure, if you will. In Sonic Adventure, the philosophy behind the level themes was for the music to reflect the level's atmosphere, aesthetic, and pace. SA2 does much the same, however, because of the linear story system and all the characters having their own exclusive levels, the music now reflects the tone of the story at that point in time, and also the characters themselves who play in them. Now, I definitely am not educated in music, so I can't really describe the music in any sort of official descriptive way. I'll just describe how the music sounds to me and how it makes me feel. I'll go into detail with the tone of each level music in the story analysis, but in general, Sonic's level themes tend to feature heavy rock, making use of electric guitar as the primary driving force of the melody, with heavy bass underlying it all. Shadow's themes are similar, but with a more dark overtone to them, making more use of mixing styles you'd hear at a nightclub or rave. His level music also features vocal undertones, which I think is a really subtle way of alluding to the inner voices that plague his mind and drive him to act in the way he does. More on that in the story analysis. Tails' level themes make heavy use of electronica, but are upbeat and positive sounding, reflecting his both optimistic and youthful character and his intelligent mecha-maniac side. Eggman's level themes are much the same, but the positive tone in Tails' tracks are instead more dark and devious sounding, perfect for someone such as Eggman. Knuckles' level themes are probably the most infamous of them all of them featuring jazzy hip-hop raps, the lyrics of which are always describing what's going on in Knuckles' head at that point in the story, in a very tough, I don't need anybody's help way, might I add. I don't care what anyone says, these raps are amazing earworms I could listen to all day. Rouge's level themes feature jazzy, upbeat tunes with a feminine tone, reflecting Rouge's self-confident, cunning personality. Her level music all features non-lyrical vocals that sing along to the melodies in a smooth, almost seductive way. These themes are really easy on the ears and are a joy to listen to while hunting. Returning themes from Sonic Adventure 1 have been updated. In particular, I'd like to mention that invincibility theme. It uses Sonic's SA1 theme's opening guitar melody, but also uses a melody that calls back to You Can Do Anything, the theme song for the Japanese and European versions of Sonic CD. This isn't the only instance of that song's melody making its way into the adventure games. The song Calm After the Storm also incorporates it. Honestly, You Can Do Anything needs to make a return, not only in full form, but as a recurring jingle throughout the games. Just as a nice form of musical tradition for the Sonic series. So, just like SA1, SA2 features Crush 40 to perform the main theme of the game, but also every playable character still has their own theme song. For Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles, they are all reprisals of their SA1 themes, with the same lyrics but completely overhauled in every other way. Where Sonic's theme in SA1 was quintessential 90s, his theme in SA2 is quintessential 2000s. Tails' SA1 theme had a tone of longing and yearning, whereas SA2 theme is confident and decisive. Knuckles' SA1 theme was passionate and intimate, with rough jumps to tough, intense rapping, whereas in SA2 the intense rapping is pushed to the forefront. Of the new themes, Eggman finally has his own full vocal song, which is just as boisterous as you would imagine. It sings about how amazing he is, and how much he hates Sonic, and how he deserves to be Emperor of the World. Rouge's theme is a smooth, intimate groove that goes on about how she's free and in charge of her own life and destiny, but if obsessing over treasure is really the key to her happiness. Shadow's theme is definitely the most complex out of the bunch, and we can glean from it some insight into his character in the story. I'll go into more detail with this theme later, but the theme features chaotic instrumentation, chanting vocals, and heavy repetition to reflect the state of Shadow's mind over the course of the story. Even if the characters don't have their own stories anymore, they still went the extra mile in giving everyone their own theme that really fleshes out their characters. I do prefer all of the SA1 versions of the reprise songs, but the vocal themes are something that has become synonymous with Sonic, and SA2 does not disappoint. Even with all these different styles and composers, it all manages to come together to create one hell of a legendary soundtrack, enhance the overall experience, and immerse you into each character, level, or story moment. While we're on the subject of sound, let's talk a bit about the sound effects. In Sonic Adventure 1, the classic sound effects had been updated to sound more believable and take advantage of the more powerful hardware. Strangely though, SA2 seems to walk back on some sound effects and instead use classic sound effects. But the basic jump sound has been replaced with a more realistic whoosh sound, and Shadow actually has his own unique jump sound. Honestly, I prefer SA1's jump sound. It has this cool neon digital twinge to it that I really like. I want to dive into the art direction for a bit. Both Sonic Adventure 1 and 2 were heavily inspired by Sonic Team's real-life experiences, visiting Central and South America and living in San Francisco during the production of SA2. The locales and even characters of Adventure 1 were inspired by or even recreated from locations they visited during development. With SA2, the locales of the game were hugely influenced by San Francisco, from the steep hills of City Escape to the Golden Gate Bridge look of Radical Highway and Mission Street, even to the allusion to Alcatraz with all the prison island levels. Apparently, the destructible cars in City Escape were the devs' way of venting their frustration toward the traffic they had to deal with daily. Because of the more powerful Dreamcast and the team's real-life inspiration, there was now an emphasis put on realism in the environments when it came to textures and general aesthetic. In the same vein of how the 2D Sonic games all took strides to show off the Genesis/Mega Drive's power, the adventure games do the same with the Dreamcast, opting to show the kinds of worlds that can be created in 3D. In terms of art style, the 2D games played with the strengths of the hardware with color depth and geometric textures, giving a techno dreamworld vibe, whereas the adventure games played to the strengths of its hardware with the photorealistic textures and vibrant lighting. That's not to say the 2D games were completely surrealist or abstract. Compared to other platformers at the time, the Sonic games took more care into making each location and level feel more grounded and part of an actual world. Even with this distinction though, the adventure games do well to make sure all the locations are just as imaginative and still feel like part of the Sonic world with their more realistic but still surreal aesthetic, layouts, and assets. Without a doubt, the passion and excitement Sonic Team approached SA1 and 2 with went a long way in making these games not only good, but memorable. So, let's talk about the character designs, and first I want to talk about the two new characters and how they're designed, Shadow and Rouge. Shadow went through quite a few different iterations before his final design. They were clearly going for some kind of really dark anti-Sonic, and it seems like they really wanted him to have only one eye for a while. And let me just say, I'm so glad they went with the final result. It's a much more sophisticated take on what a dark anti-Sonic would look like. He very much does resemble Sonic, but has his own unique look, sporting a striking black, red, and yellow color scheme, with his arms and belly being covered in fur, unlike with Sonic. Not to mention manly chest hair of manliness. But I think what I love most is that there's so much in his design that is meaningful. Shadow uses air shoes to achieve top speed, but not only does this give him some really unique footwear, this informs his running animations as well, stylishly skating all around, and also feeds into a theme of SA2, which is artificiality, namely with the fake Chaos Emerald, Artificial Chaos, Master Emerald Alter Replica, Chaos Drives. Shadow isn't naturally gifted like Sonic is, so he instead utilizes these shoes to even the playing field. Secondly, he has these rings around his wrists and ankle which fit perfectly within the Sonic series, and come into play as power inhibitors of sorts in later games and iterations of Shadow. Lastly, his quills curve upward, curiously in the exact same shape as Super Sonic. This little design choice is an important piece of the puzzle to the overall story of the game. And then we have Rouge the Bat, and she is just a treat. You can really tell with this design that they went all in with femininity as a core concept, with her bra and the tips of her boots being pink hearts. From the beginning, you can really tell that they wanted her to have a curvy figure, and color scheme that accentuated her legs to complement her primary attack of kicking. To balance out the size of her boots at the bottom, she has big ears at the top. Her eyelids hang low in a sultry manner, allowing us to get a good look at her blue eyeshadow, which really pops out from the rest of the design, and I think completes it. Next, and this is something I wish I went over in my SA1 video, Sonic Adventure featured updated designs to every existing character, necessitated by the evolution into 3D in a more story and dialogue-driven setting. I'll have a link in the description with an excerpt from the Sonic art book with Yuji Yoshikawa, the character designer for SA1. He talks about how because the camera was above and behind Sonic, using his shorter 2D design created by Naoto Oshima covered up too much of his body and made his head look huge. So they made all the characters a bit taller, adjusted their proportions, gave detail to the bottom of all the characters' shoes, and made Sonic's spines longer and curvier. With the taller look, they gave his fur a deeper shade of blue, which all had the side effect of making Sonic look older from the 2D games. Considering Sonic's shade of blue was always getting gradually darker in the games and the artwork, I think this is really fitting, and it works really well as portraying the character's growth through his design, almost like he's going through puberty. And in my onion, this new look ended up reflecting Sonic's rebellious and action hero persona much better. Other characters underwent great change as well, such as Amy, who now has a much different silhouette from Sonic, and a classy red dress and boots. Eggman was also redesigned to look a bit more anatomically plausible and egg-shaped, while making him look cooler and more menacing. This redesign helps us take Eggman more seriously, and since with SA2 we're meant to identify with him more, I feel like it makes a lot of sense. Lastly, every character was given colored irises that contrast with their other colors. Sonic was given green irises to reflect the green pastures he's always looking out into, like Green Hill. I suspect Tails' eyes were made blue because he's always looking into the sky, flying and dreaming big. And Knuckles' eyes might have been made purple, a color of royalty, to reflect his ancestors' heritage of plundering riches. Yoshikawa took what he thought were the most iconic part of Sonic's design, his eyes and quills, and focused on making those really expressive. And he created some really amazing 2D artwork for both adventure games and the advanced games that really showed off the strengths of these designs and how dynamic these characters could be with them. Where the 2D games artwork were simple with a pop, jazzy flair to them, the adventure games had a looser, more graffiti style. SA1's endgame models carry with the general look of Yoshikawa's artwork, but are a bit shorter and have a more rounded look to them. The updated DX models adapt Yoshikawa's 2D artwork into 3D more faithfully, and I prefer them in that game, only without the glossy plastic lighting and texture work they have. SA2 makes his character models in the same fashion, according to the artwork, though something of note is that the textures and lighting on them are a lot less detailed than SA1's models, making them look more flat. With the exception of Shadow, however, whose fur does actually have some detailed texture work, making him look somewhat out of place compared to everyone else. This is definitely something a remake, or at the very least a graphical overhaul, could improve on with SA2. And I want to talk about Sonic's running animation. In the 2D games, once Sonic reached higher levels of speed, he'd tuck his arms in front of him as if prepared to roll into a ball. In SA1 and 2, he'll now put his arms behind him in a ninja run of sorts. I suspect it was changed because now that we're in 3D, and the camera is behind Sonic most of the time instead of at the side, having a ninja run made it easier to distinguish from his lower speed animation than tucking his arms in front of him. I actually prefer this way of conveying his faster run speed because, one, it's a subtle way of communicating Sonic's growth and that he's much more skilled skilled and graceful than he was in the past. And 2, it just looks cooler. Only thing that SA2 omitted from SA1 was that SA1 had another run animation that was reserved for top speed, where he would stop bobbing up and down as he ran and his legs and feet would be moving so fast they'd be a blur. I wish SA2 kept this, as it's just another way of conveying what level of speed you're at through the character's body language. And while we're on the subject, Knuckles' run animation is notable too. I've always liked the way he runs in SA1 and 2. When he runs, he's very spastic, rough. Not like Sonic, who is more graceful in comparison. I always thought that this was a nice little detail that conveyed Knuckles' personality nicely. He can run extremely fast himself, but unlike Sonic, he has to visibly exert himself, and the twitchy nature of his run conveys his more rough around the edges and impulsive personality. Rouge shares a similar quality to her run animation, however I feel like it doesn't fit her as well. I don't know, how do you think a Treasure Hunter Spy combo should run? SA2 featured a deal between Sega and Soap Shoes, a brand of shoes meant for grinding on rails, complete with billboard ads in the urban levels of the game. But biggest of all, they took a leap and actually changed Sonic's shoes to reflect the Soap brand. And they look amazing. Not only do they go right along with the new grinding mechanic, but these shoes really gel well with Sonic's hyper-athletic character and stylish new design. And the shape of the shoes really go together well with Sonic's silhouette when running, as they're shaped in a dipping curve, whereas his old shoes were shaped more in an arcing curve. But they also have this really detailed, futuristic look to them that I love, especially when you obtain the Lightspeed Dash power-up. What's great is that they still remain faithful to his original shoes with the red, white, and yellow color scheme and placements of each color. Honestly, I want these shoes to return, even if the Soap brand doesn't actually exist anymore. I think they look beautiful on Sonic, and I definitely like them more than his original shoes. Not to crap on them or anything. So the character designs were updated to properly work in 3D, but also to reflect the direction the series was always building up to and growing into, as a fantasy, sci-fi, shonen action series. In 2D, the classic designs work there because your view of everything is more detached, and the plot is expressed through action rather than dialogue. The taller, more detailed designs of all the characters work better for a setting where you're much more involved in the action, with heavy amounts of dialogue. This is something the Sonic OVA understood as well, as the character designs there were very similar to the adventure games in that they made the characters look more mature, to better fit the more story-driven setting with more dark moments. And honestly, I'd prefer if all Sonic games went with the adventure designs, 2D or 3D. Not really talking about the modern designs as seen in Unleashed and onwards, as I think they're a little too tall, stiff, and not very expressive. Also, side mouth 100% of the time really bothers me. More so Yuji Uekawa's artwork and SA1 and 2's in-game models with obvious graphical improvements. SA1 and 2 already show how well these designs work in a 3D story and dialogue heavy setting, but I think these designs could also work really well in the 2D games too. The Advance and Rush series already prove this. They're not too tall such that controlling them would feel unwieldy, but I also believe that Sonic games should strive to tell good stories regardless of 2D or 3D, and I think the adventure designs are best suited toward that end. And also, it'd add some nice cohesion and consistency between all the games, which is something Sonic could really do with more of. That's not to say the classic designs are outdated or anything, or should be totally scrapped. I just think the adventure games made really valuable evolutions to the character designs that the series really benefited from, and I don't think the Sonic series should artificially limit itself to how complex its stories are allowed to be. But why am I so adamant on stories in Sonic games though, you may be wondering? I mean, this is just a cartoon blue hedgehog we're talking about, right? Well, join me in part 2 when we dive into analyzing the story going bit by bit, where we'll also talk about each level as they come up and go deeper into some songs. Like and subscribe if you haven't already, and consider a support on Patreon to help me make more stuff like this and my fan-made Pokemon anime series Manifest Art. While we're at it, check out my Twitch where I stream animation progress and games. Peace out.